Welcome to Andy and Ari On3. You've had Wendy's Nuggs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? When you do saucy nugs, take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, the hot versions of all those flavors, of course. Or if you're a real heat seeker, try the spicy ghost pepper only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before for a whole new way to nug. It's got to be Wendy's. This is Andy Ari On3. Portal Day. Got a little bonus for you. So we're going to do our show. Hi, Ari.
Hey, Andy. Good morning.
And then we're going to start over again and do the transfer portal show. Pete Nakos, who, if Pete Nakos didn't say it, it didn't happen in the transfer portal. He's going to join us. JD Piquel's going to join us. We're going to talk about the guys that have already said they're going in, what might happen going forward, how this process works, because it is essentially the first day of free agency in college football. So we're going to talk about that. But obviously, there's a ton of other stuff going on. We got to talk about playoff seeding, because that was a hot topic. We got to talk about non-conference scheduling, because one of the ADs who got left out of the playoff was not pleased about that.
I'm very fired up about that.
Yeah, Ari's very fired up about that. And then we got to talk a little coaching drama, because a lot of stuff happened while we were watching the conference championship games, while the playoff was being set, and we kind of got to catch up a little bit. But Ari, let's start with the seeding stuff, because we heard Kirby Smart yesterday talking about how the seeding sucks. He's right. We've said it all year.
Mm-hmm.
We said, oh, the 5 seed's going to get the easiest. It's actually probably the 6 seed. I think Penn State probably got the
6 seed ended up doing it, getting the easiest path this year, Andy, because we didn't anticipate that the ACC champion would be the 12 seed. So that's how that all got a little bit wonky, but that's also part of the reason why it's a hard thing to solve outside of doing the one thing that they have to do, because you can't reward the highest seed with the easiest path if teams that are 8 and 9 and 10 are some of the best teams in college football. So what you need to do, and I guess that might still be true in the future, is just rank them 1 through 12 based on seeding in the rankings. Just use the rankings to seed. And then if you're a conference champion, if you want to guarantee 4, then their seeding would correlate to their ranking. They get a guaranteed spot.
They get a guaranteed spot in the playoff, but not a guaranteed seed.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right. So if you're 16th in the rankings and you won your conference, then you were the last seed.
Yeah. And that makes plenty of sense. And I know why they did it. I know why they did it this way, where the top 4 conference champions got the top 4 seeds, because there were a bunch of whiners in the BCS era and in the 14 playoff era. They're like, conference championships have to matter. Well, no, they don't. They don't need to matter.
Well, as it turns out, what matters is just making it to the conference championship game, not winning it. So, that's the way that they did it. So,
well, and all conferences aren't created equal. And I know nobody wants to believe that.
Well, the fact of the matter is that like SEC championship game loser, the Big Ten championship loser, and the ACC championship game loser all got the same benefit. Now, it didn't manifest in the same seeding or the same area of the rankings, but they all were afforded the opportunity to remain in the field and not have their seeding hurt all that much by that loss. So, that is the way that the committee did it this year. And Andy, I think it's interesting because in the first 10 years of this process, I don't ever recall this being the case. Now, maybe it felt different because there were only 4 teams getting in.
There's 2 games, so it wasn't really a big deal.
Yeah, but losing that game, I guess, so here's the thing. Since the beginning of time with the playoff, you hear buzzwords like deliberations, you hear it like precedent, and is it a slippery slope and all this stuff. And, I used to get all fired up about that, but this isn't like the Supreme Court. Like, they are new people or different people every year who just do what they want to do in that year. Now, a lot of times they use the same guidelines and kind of try to think similarly, but just because they rewarded all the conference championship game losers this year doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to bear out in the future. Like, I think that it's all like individual 1-year living organisms that change and evolve over time, because this is the way that they arrived at this was not the way that I thought they would.
The other thing about this is this system, the format was sort of slapped together, and it was slapped together before the contract ended. So the new contract starts the 2026 season. They can change all of this if they want to, and I think they're probably going to change some stuff. But I checked with some people last night. They think more than likely you're stuck with this for next year. That there's going to be like this for next year. But it's interesting, like Doughboy in the chat brings up an interesting possibility. Is the easy solution to get rid of the buys for conference champs, but guarantee conference champs home field in the first round, which is actually what the NFL does with division champs.
Right.
Because you're like, wait, why is that team with a better record have to go on the road in the playoff? Oh, because they're going to a division champ. Like, that's how the AFC South champion.
But like,
gets
what do you
game,
think of the notion? Because I never even really considered it, of just removing bye weeks.
Well, that's what they're going to do.
Yeah,
that's what they're going. They're going to go to 14. There's going to be 2 buys.
Just like no buys at all.
Yeah. Well, that would be a 16-team playoff.
Well, yeah, I mean, might as well get to 50 at this rate. So.
Well, it's 16,
that way Alabama can get it no matter what.
16 is the only way to do that. If you want to do that again, you got to go to 64. So 16 would be the.
Oh, is that the math on it?
That's the math. Yeah.
I would never have known that. Thank you for that.
Yes, if you're going to have a 4-round playoff, which is what they have now,
you have to have an equal amount of
16
games.
would have no buys. So
what's it called? Never mind. Go ahead. I was trying to think of
exponents.
Exponent. Yeah.
Yes. 4 squared is 16. 4 cubed is 64.
I was on the cubed show this morning.
Yes, right. You were on Cold Cube show and Greg McElroy. Actually, before we talk about that, because we do need to talk about that, because you and Greg McElroy got into it. Greg McElroy, Alabama grad, got into some interesting debate about conference or not conference scheduling, but out of conference scheduling. Before we talk about that, I want to tell you about Gametime, because if you would like to attend some of these on-campus playoff games, you can with Gametime. If you're looking on the screen right now, hit that GT Picks button and look at the Ohio State Tennessee tickets. So the $300 range. Like, for this, that's not terrible. Now, if you want to go to Indiana, Notre Dame, you're going to be forking over some bucks. It's like $800 to get in. And then if you want a good seat, it's up there. But if you want to go, you can, because Gametime has the tickets to all of these games. Go to Gametime, download the app, use the code STAPLES, and get $20 off your purchase. Terms apply. Hit the GT Picks button. It gives you the best prices relative to the market, so you know you're getting the best deal. So download the app, code STAPLES, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. If you want to go to a college football playoff game on campus, you can with Gametime, guaranteed. Ari, let's talk about this. Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, tweeted on Sunday that essentially, if this is how it's going to be, then they need to reconsider their non-conference scheduling. And he got community noted on Twitter.
He did.
If you don't use Twitter, a community note is when everybody says, hey, here's a little extra context that might change how you feel about this particular tweet. In this particular tweet, the readers added, all of Alabama's losses came in conference play. Alabama's non-conference schedule was actually one of the easiest in the country. Now, they did try to play a hard game by going to Wisconsin. It turned out Wisconsin didn't cooperate and wound up being bad this year. But, all right, if Alabama had gone to Ohio State and beaten Ohio State and then lost those 3 conference games in the playoff, correct?
Yeah. So here's the thing. The SEC people who are saying these things, what they're trying to say, just so you understand, is that if strength of schedule isn't going to matter in the future, that they have nothing to gain by potentially losing an extra non-conference game when losses mattered and their schedule didn't. And it's basically just a jab at Indiana. Right. Because Indiana didn't play anybody in the non-conference and wound up 11-1. But there is this notion as a result of this that people are saying that strength of schedule did not matter this year. And that is just blatantly and patently false. Like, it's not true at all. Now, there are teams that made it to the playoff, like SMU and Indiana, who didn't play big time SEC games, who didn't have the marquee wins that, Alabama and Ole Miss have. But they also had less margin of error during the season to do that. The reason why SMU is in and the reason why Indiana is in is because they took their weaker schedule and went 11-1 and 10-2 with a conference championship game loss. That's why they're in. It's not that strength of schedule didn't matter. It meant that they took their easier schedule and they were much, much better and more consistent during that period.
Right. They played teams that were as good as Vanderbilt and Oklahoma.
Yes.
Which Alabama lost to.
And if you want to ask a team if strength of schedule mattered, or, do a case study of what it would be like going 10-2 against an easier schedule, why don't we invite Miami up to the stage?
Yes.
They weren't even in the conference or in the playoff discussion yesterday, even though they had one fewer loss than Alabama because their conference schedule and their strength of schedule was bad.
Yeah.
Alabama.
And they tried to schedule a tough out of conference game, but Florida didn't cooperate.
Right.
Yeah.
So throughout the year are rewarded. Alabama being in the discussion on Sunday morning is proof that strength of schedule matters, because if it didn't, they have no case to be in.
Right.
Like they're not even in the discussion.
Ole Miss, the only power conference team they played out of conference was Wake Forest.
Yeah, if they would have beaten
Imagine
one more
if they
team.
played somebody good out of conference.
So I actually feel like the response to this should be the exact opposite, because you need if you're going to just resign yourself to going 9-3 and thinking that that's good enough as the athletic director of Alabama, then you might as well try to go 9-3 with as many big time games on your schedule as possible to buoy your chances of getting in. Now, most years you're not going to have an Indiana type team at 11-1. And the thing that I think is really annoying is that there's this resentment of Indiana's existence in the field. Like, I think that if you're not an Indiana fan, and your team was on the bubble, you despise Indiana. And it's like, listen, Indiana plays in the Big Ten. They had to play Michigan. They played Ohio State. They got a good draw. It's not their fault that the Big Ten schedule stunk this year, that they had to play. But that's what's going to happen all the time. Texas and Indiana both were recipients of advantageous paths in their conference. But in this sport, the way it's set up, when you do get an easier draw, you have to take advantage of it.
Right.
And they did. So there will be years where Texas has to play Georgia and LSU and South Carolina and Ole Miss all on the road or whatever, and it's going to suck for Texas. But this year, Texas didn't have to do that. They took advantage. They didn't lose to anybody but Georgia, and they're in. So when you have a hard schedule, you have to win games and not lose to Vanderbilt. And when you have an easy schedule, you have to lose one fewer game than the teams. You are rewarded with a harder schedule with an extra loss being afforded to you. So it's not that it doesn't matter. It just, the circumstance of the sport is not everybody's going to play in the SEC. And if you don't think that Indiana should be in going 11-1 in the Big Ten, then you don't even think the SEC should be playing in the same sport as everybody else, because you're just going to pull everybody out to put the SEC in. It's like, okay, well, if the SEC is just automatically better than everybody else, even when they've lost 2 fewer games than you, then do you want to just break off and go play SEC football in the South alone? It doesn't make any sense. Why do you even want Indiana in the field or in the sport?
They don't.
Okay, so just go play this 18-team NFL South League, but that's, you win some and you lose some. And I hate to tell you, Alabama, you're a great team and a great program, but you lost this year.
Well, the lesson,
and the only one you have to blame is yourself.
The lesson, as always, is don't lose to Vanderbilt. It's pretty simple. Don't lose to Vanderbilt.
I also understand, and I understand if you're an Alabama fan where you're coming from, because we know we're not idiots. We know that Alabama had a tough schedule this year, playing in the SEC and having to play Georgia and LSU and all these games that they had to play makes you more susceptible to having an off game against the Vanderbilt, right? It's not just that Vanderbilt beat you. If you want to say that you were grinded down and it's hard to get up every single week and you have to play at Tennessee, you have to play at LSU. I mean, even at Oklahoma sucked this year, but on the wrong day, Oklahoma has good players. I understand the thought of that, but at the same time too, it's just if you were Texas and Texas was you would unequivocally believe that you deserve to get in with no quality wins the way that Texas did, right? It just, you got to know that it's cyclical, that you will be the beneficiary of an easy schedule in the future, because with a conference that size, you can't possibly play as many teams. And that's just the way it works. But if you are oh, I cannot believe Indiana's in over us, then an 11-1 team from the Big Ten not being worthy because your schedule is so much harder then don't play. You don't want to be in college football anymore. Just be in the SEC. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, the SEC and the Big Ten probably headed that way anyway.
But it is funny that the Big Ten team is the one that's getting the brunt of this.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a group of 5.
And the thing is,
they're in the Big Ten.
Is there going to be, because I think this is pretty fluky, is there going to be a Big Ten schedule in the future in the next 10 years that winds up like this has for Indiana.
I mean, yeah, I don't know.
The randomness of it all, I don't even think that's going to happen very often.
Yeah, I mean, I got to go look at who they played, but they played a bunch of teams that have been very good in the last 15 years.
Well, the Michigan, right? They played.
This year.
We assumed when we saw the schedule, oh, they've got Michigan and Ohio State back to back. There's no way they're.
Yeah, at the beginning of the year, everyone's like, Indiana's going to make the playoff. It's like, all right, buddy, we got Michigan and Ohio State back to back there at the end of the year, and it's like, okay, well, at the time we didn't know that Michigan wasn't going to be very good. But I'm going to go look at the Indiana schedule here, so bear with me while I do this. Okay, 11-1, 8-1 in the Big Ten. So, okay, listen. There are going to be years where UCLA is better than they've been. Okay, they had to play Maryland, Northwestern, and Nebraska. Those aren't tough games, but in the future, Nebraska is going to be a tougher game.
I can give you Indiana's next year's conference.
But before we do that, though, let's just go through this. Nebraska and Washington were easy games that might not be so easy in the future. Michigan was an easy game that's not easy in the future.
State isn't always
State's
easy.
Not always easy on the road. Ohio State that. If you took this schedule back 2 years ago, it's a hard schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. So next year at home, they get Illinois, Michigan State, UCLA, and Wisconsin. Away, they get Iowa, Maryland, Oregon, Penn State, and Purdue. Like, you go on the road to Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State.
Yeah. Like
that's a hard schedule.
So it's going to be different every single year. And the reason why it's going to be this random is because we've, put teams in California in the Big Ten and are trying to figure out how to play a 9-game schedule, and you just can't play everybody. So, also too, if you're upset, just blame the television networks. Like, the conferences are so stupid. Like, I know we're a year into it. It's just dumb that Washington, Oregon, and USC are in the Big Ten. And the Pac-12 would have been awesome.
The Pac-12 would have been great this year.
And it would have been great for the sport. I missed Andy, a year into this, I missed the Pac-12.
Well, maybe they'll get back together someday.
And Penn State would have finally won the Big Ten championship. Maybe they might have had to play Ohio State again.
Maybe. Speaking of getting back together, Scott Frost is going back to UCF.
It's electric.
This happened on Saturday, so we were all watching conference championship games. Now, I put him on my hot board when the UCF job opened because I knew that Scott had been trying to get back in. He actually tried to get back into some stuff last year, and it was a slog for him to get even considered for jobs because of how bad things went at Nebraska. But UCF, unique situation. That's where he went undefeated in 2017. And that's why he got the Nebraska job and why we thought when he got the Nebraska job, well, this is a slam dunk. This is easy. And it was interesting. So he had his initial press conference on Sunday and he was talking about, sometimes as you're climbing the ladder, nobody tells you to stop when you're happy. And look, nobody begrudged Scott Frost leaving UCF for Nebraska, for his alma mater. But I do wonder sometimes, and I have thought about this, because, we have this Peter principle discussion in college football where you have these coaches that go up and up and up, and then they hit the spot, and then they just can't win there. Do you think Scott Frost, because we've seen him do this, go undefeated at UCF, do you think he can come back in and all of what happened at Nebraska is suddenly wiped away and he's just back to winning?
We have to analyze what made him successful to begin with the first time there. And you have to analyze whether or not that is something you could duplicate now.
Right.
And it's a much different job now. It's a much different landscape now. And, I think that, the things that went wrong at Nebraska concern me. Like, that's not a Nebraska
right.
thing.
And when
that's
he got
Scott Frost
when he
thing.
got to UCF, the Griffin brothers were stuck there.
Yeah.
The Griffin brothers had signed with George O'Leary, and Shaquille was doing great. Shaquem was buried on the depth chart. Like, you realize Shaquem's a great player, and you develop him, and that's great. And obviously, he brought in Mackenzie Milton. That was a player who he'd been tracking, who, when he was the OC at Oregon, had loved him in camp and thought, okay, love to have you here. When he got the UCF job, he could sign Mackenzie Milton.
Yeah.
But a lot of the players they had success with were George O'Leary recruits who could not leave because the transfer rules did not work the way they do now. He's going to have to build this roster from scratch and do it in a more difficult conference.
Yeah, also, too, the general dysfunction of the entire Nebraska program under his leadership scares the hell out of me, too.
Right.
Like, I don't know if that's like a Nebraska problem. That was a Scott.
I don't
Frost
think that's
problem.
a Nebraska problem because you're not
So-
seeing that under Matt Rule.
Yeah. Like, listen, I understand going back and getting a coach that went undefeated for you. And I understand that, if it worked once, it maybe could work again. I'm skeptical.
It's going to be a harder job than it was.
Yeah.
The conference was easier that he was in. Now, the American of 2017 and the Big 12 of now are not entirely different, but it is more rugged in the Big 12 now. And again, you have to build this roster from scratch. So I am excited he's got another chance because I hated the way it went.
I mean, it is also possible too that just like going back home, trying to be the savior, all the pressure of having to win and having to win soon because people are expecting, like, maybe that ate him alive.
Yeah.
Like, as you know, too, it's like when we think about other coaches who haven't been successful in positions and then gone on to other places and done better, maybe that just Nebraska wasn't for him.
Yeah.
Like, and it's possible, so.
Well, Jason in the chat says, what's a realistic year one expectation for Frost? I'd say get him to a bowl game because Gus couldn't get into a bowl game this year. And they did they were 6-6 and went to a bowl game in the first year in the Big 12, but get them to a bowl game. Now, look, it is the Big 12. At UCF, you should be able to build a contender for the Big 12 title. It should not take long. Like by year 2, if you're doing this right, you should be in the mix for the Big 12 title.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Just the area of the country and, portal destination size of the university. It always seems to be like a place that should be better than
a lot of the things you were saying about Arizona State, the positives for Arizona State.
Yeah.
UCF is very similar to that.
But UCF probably still has a long way to go for the alumni base, right?
Oh, yeah. They're generations behind because it's a much younger school. So they don't have as much money as somebody. But none of the schools in the Big 12, other than the Texas old line, Baylor, TCU, nobody has gobs of money.
Obviously, you haven't been watching Landman.
I have been watching Landman, but I don't see Texas Tech.
No, it's TCU.
Well, I said TCU. I said Baylor and TCU. They have lots of money.
Got the oil barons with the nice burgundy suits.
No, Baylor and TCU have the money, but
those very rich guys that wear the cowboy hats that go, "Pardon me, ma'am."
I'll
tell you what.
Who wear a blazer and a cowboy hat to work. I should do a show in a blazer and cowboy hat.
Obviously, you've never gone to a steakhouse in Dallas and seen that half the restaurant is wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots with a suit.
You take your cowboy hat off
and you put it on the table.
Dinner, yes.
Yeah,
I think it'll be a very interesting situation to watch because, again, he's getting another chance. He has succeeded here before. The last time we saw him, as you pointed out, everything was dysfunctional. Yeah. Every aspect of Nebraska's program was dysfunctional under Scott Frost. He has to show that's going to be different this time. Now, that staff, it's interesting because I think he's got to go build his staff from whole cloth too.
Yeah.
Because those guys have kind of scattered to the winds and they've got jobs elsewhere. And I don't know if they're all going to just get the band back together.
Yeah. So what's the main qualification for him in this job?
That he has done it before with success.
Yeah.
So he looks good in that UCF polo.
Yeah, he's a handsome man.
Okay. We have a theory that handsomeness does.
There's a correlation between handsome, like for instance, and this isn't a handsomeness thing, but I think last name does. I think the way you look does.
Wait, last name is like who you are, who your daddy was, or how cool your name sounds.
Like if you would have blindfolded me when the Chicago Bears
Matt Eberflus
and never showed me what he looked like, I'm like, that guy's gonna get fired.
Okay, I'm gonna push back on this.
Okay,
I'm gonna push back on this. So when Bill Belichick first got a head coaching job with the Browns, Belichick and Eberflus aren't that different.
Eberflus,
if you don't know what
Eberflus, Belichick,
Eberflus,
okay, Belichick,
Scattaboo. You've never seen him play before. You're like, that's like a Scandinavian name. That guy can't play football.
Who are what's the weirdest name of a coach that's
Belichick
in college football who's good?
Oh, in college
Kirby Smart. Like that's like a normal last
name.
Saban,
no.
Saban's a normal name.
Sarkisian.
Sarkisian's kind of a weird name.
It's Albanian, I believe.
Yeah, but it's not like I mean, Eberflus, there's just something about it that just,
you said that "you" is getting you every time.
yeah, Flus is, I think it's just a bizarre. Sarkisian is
Flus and lose,
but
sound very similar.
Sarkisian still is like it sounds like a strong name. Like I don't know, Eberflus sounds
This
like a weak.
this is a very good off-season topic that sometime in March.
But
we'll revisit?
But do you agree with me though, to just looking at Matt Eberflus and looking at his like the way his mannerisms are and his last name, like it was just doomed to fail from the beginning, or do you think that there's something more to it than that?
I think there's significantly more to it than that, but
okay.
I
invested a bunch of money into Justin Fields.
This is where it's coming from. I did. Come on. Explain.
And the second that I saw who was coaching him, I'm like, I made a mistake. And it had nothing to do with anything other than his aura and his last name.
Well, let's stay in the Big 12 and talk about it.
He stopped calling timeouts during Thanksgiving and then got fired.
Let's talk about a coach in the Big 12 who, for most of his career, has had immense aura. Mike Gundy.
Strong name.
Exactly. Mike Gundy had a terrible year this year. Terrible. But let's not forget that he changed the entire trajectory of Oklahoma State's program. That used to be a very hard job. It wasn't a place where they went to bowl games every year. Like, he changed everything there. He had his worst year this year. So he has a contract that perpetually rolls over. Oklahoma State's like, hey, we got to do something about your contract. We can't be paying you this much. We can't be guaranteeing you this much money. And there was a little standoff there. And I'm not sure if Gundy's people put out that they were threatening to fire him for cause. I don't think Oklahoma State ever really considered firing him for cause because they don't have a cause. They would have had to pay him. But it ended up being more like a Jim Harbaugh situation at Michigan, where they went back to the table. Gundy agreed to take a lower salary. Now, and the Jim Harbaugh Michigan situation, the lower salary was just punitive. Like, you're losing, we're going to pay you less money. At Oklahoma State, they said when they announced that they have redone the contract, they're going to take the money and give it to the players.
Yeah. And I think that this is a hour-long episode.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about this.
This is
more
not
later.
a 5-minute conversation.
Yeah.
This is a whole episode. But the thing that I think is interesting about this is that the word standoff was used quite a bit, Andy. But actually, somebody who's been at Oklahoma State for as long as Gundy's been there and how much money he's made over the years, like, he's not going to be starving anytime soon.
No,
like, you would think from a legacy standpoint, from a competitive standpoint, that he would be on board with this. Of like, okay, well, if you're not going to give it to me, give it to the players. Let me get some guys in here that can put me in a position to, to win more games, help my legacy, try to get us over the top, and off you go. Now, the thing that I think is super interesting here, Andy, more than anything is this the beginning of a trend where coaches' salaries are going to be going downward, and whether or not moving forward, coaches are going to get paid in between $4 and $5 million rather than $9 and $11 million at the biggest places in the country, because they need that $5 million to pay their quarterback. Like that to me is the next step of like, hey, how's the money going to be allocated? Is the money being allocated properly at the moment? And does there need to be an adjustment here?
I think that's a perfectly legitimate question. And I think it's logical. And I think we know the answer. That's what's going to happen. Like, this is just how markets work. Like, there's a finite amount of money. And I realize everybody thought when NIL came in that, oh, they'll just keep spending more. No, there's a finite amount of money. You have to decide how you want to distribute it. And they used to give it to the coach because they couldn't give it to the players. But now they can give it to the players. And you're going to very quickly see that unless you have Kirby Smart or somebody who has demonstrated that they are much more special than everybody else.
Well, there needs to be another debate, too, about coaching jobs right now and the difficulty of those jobs. Because back in the past, Andy, like, you paid these crazy salaries to coaches because you needed a good recruiter who also could run a program.
Right.
And like, now, if the money is being allocated to the acquisition of talent, then your number one job as a coach is being a good motivator, program builder, culture installer, and play caller. And I feel like it's much easier to find people who are good at those things than both.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, Alabama with Nick Saban was such a juggernaut, because Saban was an incredible recruiter who happened to be a very good program builder, culture, installer, right, and play caller and hirer. So if you're going to go, like, there's plenty of Dan Mullins out there, right? Dan Mullen is a great game day coach.
X and O's guy. Yeah.
Guy. He couldn't recruit anybody. or at the level that Florida needed to, and that's why he's not a coach in college football right now. But if you even the playing field on how these players are acquired, and you get GMs involved and money involved and people are paying, and it's more of a contract negotiation than it is a recruitment, then Dan Mullen might be one of the hottest coaching candidates in the carousel in 2 years.
Yeah.
And then that means to me that your value, if you're Kirby Smart, goes down. And I don't mean, and I know you might push that back on that because Kirby Smart is the modern day Nick Saban. But
yeah,
Kirby
Smart have to make 13 million? No, he can make 11 million.
I know, but Kirby Smart's paid for talent acquisition. And if the talent acquisition that Georgia is doing, like if you go look at the top 10 classes from signing day this past year, nobody signed 15 top 100 players.
Right.
Like everybody signed, like the good classes signed 7 to 9. Back in the day, like Alabama was signing 13. Georgia was signing 14. Like now that might not seem like a big deal. Oh, 7 different players.
Oh, it makes a huge difference.
It's a huge difference over a 4-year period. So if Kirby Smart is recruiting more down to earth as a result of this situation, then his inherent value as Georgia's coach is no longer as important because they're paying him to get players.
Yeah.
They weren't paying, you know what I mean? Like that, it's like everybody's like, oh, you're paid to, foster an environment that's going to develop young men and get education and all that. No, he's paid to get the best 5 stars he can get to go rock shit on the field on Saturday. And if Florida can do that better now, and Oklahoma State can do that better now, and Michigan can do that better
the
now,
value of that
skill set goes down, and the scarcity of that skill set's no longer prevalent because everybody has that skill set now. And then all of a sudden, how many coaches in college football can draw up good ball plays?
You just delivered an economics lecture.
You're right.
That's
right.
Professor Ari.
Good at math podcast, baby.
So
it's true though. There's more people who are able to draw up plays and call a good game on Saturday than there are people who can get 15 top 100 players to come to their program in a recruiting cycle.
We are going to talk about this more as the weeks go on. In fact, it dovetails into what we're about to do.
Yes.
Because this show, Andy Ari On3, Monday edition, is ending. Head back to the On3 Sports YouTube page in about 5 minutes because our transfer portal extravaganza begins because the transfer portal is open as we speak. It opened at midnight, and it is time to talk about the opening day of free agency in college football. We've already got a bunch of names that have come into the portal that we know are coming. We're going to talk to Pete Nakos, talk to JD Piquel about what happens next. And it's exactly what we're talking about because now you can build your roster in a different way. Join us for the transfer portal extravaganza. And let's find out how everybody's building their roster for 2025.